Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to add the condolences of myself and my party to the McCabe family. I knew Tom McCabe from the other side of the fence and interviewed him as a journalist, and he always struck me as a very strong Labour man, but fair in his dealings with everyone, and he was the very best of parliamentarians, and he will be missed. I would also like to ask the First Minister when she'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
I have no plans in the near future even.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Tuesday, the Scottish Government finally U-turned on its misguided plan to scrap corroboration. It brought to a close one of the most shameful episodes in this Parliament's history. When legitimate concerns were raised last year, the former Justice Secretary dismissed them as being part of a unionist conspiracy and accused opponents of, in his own words, selling out the victims of crime. Today, Lord McCluskey, who is the former Solicitor General, writes that concerns within the SNP's own ranks were silenced for fear that it would upset the independence referendum campaign. Lord McCluskey adds, and I quote, "The way in which the SNP government handled this whole matter rings alarm bells for anyone concerned with the democracy in Scotland." I agree. Does the First Minister?
First Minister.
No, I don't. And I would say to Ruth Davidson, I'm not sure if she's ever tried to silence Christine Graham, but I can tell you, in my experience, it's simply not possible. But Ruth Davidson raises an issue that I think is very important. I think it deserves to be treated seriously and substantively. The SNP government put forward the proposal to abolish the general requirement for corroboration for a very, very good reason, because we, and I suspect this objective is shared across this chamber, we want to see more people who commit crimes that are committed in private, crimes like sexual assault and rape, brought to trial and then, if guilty, brought to justice. That's the motivation here, and it's a good, sound motivation that I think everybody would agree with. The former Justice Secretary then listened to the concerns that were being raised, which was why he asked Lord Bonamy to carry out the work that Lord Bonamy has now carried out. Lord Bonamy produced his report on Tuesday. I want to take the opportunity to thank Lord Bonamy and his team for the work that they have done. But they have recommended a range of changes to the justice system that they think should go ahead if corroboration is to be abolished. And the current Justice Secretary has rightly and properly decided that we need to take a pause and consider those reforms, such as the substantive nature of them and such as the way they would change the justice system in the round and in a holistic way. So I actually take the view both that the SNP government has handled this appropriately and correctly, but also we can evidence, because of the position we are now in, that concerns that have been raised have not been swept aside. On the contrary, they have been listened to and acted upon. And now this government and indeed this Parliament has the time to look at these issues in the round. I think that's a good outcome, and I think people across the chamber should welcome it.
Ruth Davidson.
Those raising concerns had sound motivations too, and they were publicly traduced in this chamber by an SNP minister. And the First Minister's problem is that this isn't an isolated case. There is a pattern here of a majority SNP government steamrolling through its plans without any heed for rational or reasoned argument. And it's not just on corroboration. It's not just on offensive behaviour at football. Worst of all, it is named person legislation imposing upon every single child and young person a state-appointed guardian, stripping resource from those who need it most and interfering in family life for everyone. This First Minister has already delivered a U-turn on her predecessor's plans on corporation tax. She's U-turned on a new women's super prison. She's now done the right thing and U-turned on corroboration. Families are asking her on named person, will she do the right thing and U-turn on this too?
I think First Minister.
You know, I think Ruth Davidson has just demonstrated there why some people out there in the general public become so cynical about politics and politicians. When a government presses on with a plan, it's described as steamrollering. When we take the chance to listen and reflect and admit that we might not have got everything right, it's described as a U-turn. Actually, what we've done is the responsible and sensible thing. And Ruth Davidson's characterisation of the SNP government's approach to the issue of corroboration here is simply not borne out by the facts. If we had been determined to push ahead, regardless of the concerns that had been raised, the abolition of corroboration would have been done by now. It would already have been law. The fact that it's not proves the fact that we have taken the time, firstly under Kenny McCaskill, to set up the Bonamy Review, and now under Michael Matheson to act responsibly on that Bonamy Review. And on the named person, Ruth Davidson cannot go on describing things that are democratically passed by a majority of this Parliament just because she doesn't agree with them is somehow against the democratic wishes of the country. The named person legislation is about making sure we are doing everything in our power to protect vulnerable children. I stand by that legislation. I will continue to stand by it, and I will continue to make sure I lead a government that does everything in its power to make sure the most vulnerable children in our society have the protection that they deserve.